So I just want to mention a few concepts to ground in before we practice. Firstly, this sense that Hara becomes a coordinate in the body as a locus point for us to revisit continuously to assess the potency of presence in any one moment. So it becomes the body coordinate to just check in with and see how fully am I living in awareness right now. Just for example, right now, if you were to close your eyes and draw that line from the crown of the head to the mula, just noting where along that trajectory you would locate your sense of self right now. So when we're looking for this internal center of gravity, this regular orientation site to relate to self and then to meet all the waves of stimulus as we move through the world, we can tend to gravitate in the head. And that's kind of the Western pseudo-center of the body, which, as we explored on day one, is a very mercurial, temperamental space to hang out in. It's very skilled at tracking change and shifts, and for that reason, isn't a reliable ally when we're seeking stability. If we use it as our center, we are apt to become really disoriented. We're very vulnerable to temperament, to changing conditions. And so to learn, rather than that disorienting gravity in the head, we learn through arriving and centering, we learn through cultivation practices, we learn through Uddiyana Bandha and Mula Bandha, our two strong tethering activities of kinetic energy that we can use to gather and bind ourselves to the low body. And of course, so many of the yin postures themselves, which are used to both lengthen and lubricate the meridians of the low body mainly. So most of the yin postures are to address the vitality in the space from the navel to the knees. So this quote, Carl Fried Graf Durkheim, he's a German philosopher that moved to Japan and lived and practiced with in a monastery for a long time and learned not only the cultivation of Hara practices with the monks there, but also was able to witness it through watching sumo wrestlers train as well. So Hara then was a cultivation practice used for the noblest of monks and the mightiest of sumo wrestlers, both trained in this sense of having a low center of gravity, a real deep kinship with earth below, and quite difficult to knock either of those types of humans off of their center. So he writes, Hara renews the feeling contact with the divine ground, which is innate in every human, thanks to the bond which unites us with the ground of being. So this seat of our center, which is said to be about, the very nucleus of it is about 3 fingers below the navel, and then 3 fingers in towards the spine. So I often like to think about that soft tissue just at the pit of the abdomen in front of the sacral plate as the very center of the Hara orbit. But you can think of Hara not just as that precise point, but also as a whole kind of aura band around the mid-body. So for those of us that are well practiced in the chakras, you can think of Hara as encompassing all 3 of the lower chakras. From the mula, through the navel, up through solar plexus, like this big bandwidth of biointelligence. And so we'll practice in our sequence today, finding specifically Uddiyana Bandha. And Uddiyana Bandha is a really accessible way to strengthen our connection to Hara, because it's all about this gathering and then this uprising, this upthrust. Bandha means to, a lot of times in English we give it the translation bind, but that I think denotes kind of this sense of like locking and gripping in, and it's not like, we're not regurgitating a hairball. We're bringing in this really slender upthrust of chi, like a chimney flue. I said the other day, like rising mist. So it's actually, I like to think more of the translation of Bandha being more about gathering and then lifting. So that's on an energetic level. And then on a more anatomical level, you can think of Uddiyana Bandha and this gathering of attention at the Hara. It correlates very strongly with the psoas, because the psoas binds to it's tethered to the inner thigh. It binds to the lesser trochanter of the femoral head, and then it passes through the abdominal cavity and has insertion points into the diaphragm. So psoas works its way from the back body, the wings of the diaphragm, across the abdominal cavity through the ilium, through the walls of the pelvis, and forward and down into the thighs. So it connects lower body to the top body and the back body to the front body. It's the only muscle that does this in the body. And it's actually not even really a muscle at all. It's more like closer to fascia in its behavior. And so we call the psoas the spirit muscle because it connects, it unifies. It's like the yoga muscle that unifies the whole system. It inserts to the diaphragm, and just above that insertion point on the diaphragm is the end of the descending aorta, which it comes right out of the blood of the heart itself. It's the main blood vessel that carries oxygen-rich blood from the heart to the lungs and to the diaphragm. And also fresh chi as well, for the lungs and the diaphragm to then distribute. So there's a lot of blood flow here towards the top of the Hara, and in the gut, the kidneys are there, right off of the descending aorta. So this relationship between the gut and between Hara and heart is so direct that when we draw up through Uddiyana Bandha, we are stimulating the blood flow back up to the heart. So the heart doesn't have to work as hard to pump back up. And so toning the gut and strengthening Hara actually improves our cardiac health too. So in this practice, we'll cultivate an upward flow of that yin energy that's held in the reservoir of the Hara, and to also kind of, all the bandhas do this work, fighting against the prolapse of gravity. All the bandhas work to gather in and draw up. One more feature that helps cultivate Hara is deep sobbing or deep laughter. Both of those yoke us to the Taoists call this space the lower Dantian. If we have parts that have frozen or been neglected or exiled, then there's a much shorter range of emotional experience that we're willing to feel here in the belly. So there's a lot of freeze response that gets trapped in the gut, a lot of frozen parts. And so Uddiyana Bandha specifically engenders this sense of uplifting and reactivating, mobilizing the rigid structures of the psyche that get lodged here, so that the full range of emotions can be held safely in the belly realm. So let's lie down. Let's take Shavasana and go empty for a few moments before we start moving.